Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced, developer advocate at Dremio, and I wanted to do another one of these like sort of visual whiteboard type explainer videos and just kind of describing sort of the Dremio platform and sort of like where it fits and how it helps your data infrastructure. So let's just kind of start with sort of where you may be. Okay, so in this case, you might have sort of like a traditional structure where you might have like databases that are serving sort of your OLTP applications. They're basically making sure people can get users, make things. So let's say you're creating an accounting app. These are allowing people to create accounting entries and they're saved in the database. And now some of this data that you may want to start using for analytics of your application to kind of, either to eventually create like machine learning models to create sort of cool features for your application, like, recommendations, or to understand sort of trends and how on the usage of your application and so forth and so forth, to create dashboards about sales, whatever. So you might have accounting data, application data, all sorts of fun stuff that are sitting in different types of databases. Okay. Now, for your analytics purposes, what you might be doing is that you might be creating an ETL pipeline from your database to a data lake. So basically, your data lake being a repository where you just dump all this data. So just basically a storage separate from your database where you're going to dump a bunch of data and you can use it for ad hoc analytics to move to other places, but the idea is separate from your database. So this would be something like usually like object storage, like a AWS and Azure, Google Cloud, could be a Hadoop cluster, HDFS, or MapFS, something like that. And you might run some ad hoc analytics on your data lake, but you might also ETL a portion of that data, okay, over to a data warehouse where basically you're storing an additional copy of the data, which oftentimes there's a markup on that storage. So that storage is a little bit more expensive than the storage in the data lake. Then you're using the data warehouse's compute engine to run queries on that data, which oftentimes may be a little bit more expensive versus running a cluster of different things like Dremio, which I'll talk about, to run those same operations on your data lake. Okay, and you just do that, okay? And then basically that will essentially be sort of the pattern. You take the data from the transactional side of things, your application, the user interfacing side of things, move it over to your data lake, do some analytics there, and then move more data to your data warehouse where you do maybe even a little bit more high performance analytics and fuel dashboards, things like that. So what Dremio proposes is that basically, maybe you still do this, okay? You may still have some element of this movement, but with the Dremio platform, okay, we can federate this data. So let me just change the color of that box. Let's do it that way. Okay. And we can like federate the data. What does that mean? Okay. Now, when I say federate the data, it just means being able to connect them all in one place. So instead of moving all the data from your database anywhere, you could just connect your database to Dremio. Okay, and it's going to connect to that Dremio platform. Okay, and instead of having to move data from your data lake, you might just connect your data lake to and federate that data here. And essentially what's going to happen is that all your databases, your data lakes, and data warehouses can then all connect to the Dremio platform. So that's the federate data place. So that way there's one place where you can access all three. Okay, instead of having to move data around from database to data lake to data warehouse, depending on what tool you want to use, you're going to have one tool that's going to be able to access the data wherever it is. Okay, and you'll be able to have that data work together and so forth. Okay, but now that's all fine and good, but more importantly is like, if you're the data engineer, you're engineering the data and you want to make that data self-service, okay? And self-service means a couple things. People can discover the data, so that way they know what data they have access to. What do these data sets mean? So they can find documentation on that data, know where that data came from, be able to find lineage of how the data set was formed. And all that is made possible by Dremio's Semantic Layer. Okay, so then we add a semantic layer to this whole story. Okay, so we'll use that. Okay, a semantic layer. Okay, so now basically, not only is all my data connected in one place, but I can now organize it in one place. So with the semantic layer, again, I can write documentation for any data source, any or grouping of data through folders, and actually write documentation in Markdown, so that way people can sit there and say, hey, this is a data set that I have access to, but no sort of like, what is the history, what is the context of that data set, without them having to go through a long chain of having to sort of like do research. Like, it's the information is right there for them to consume, so they can get to actually taking that data and discovering insights quicker. Okay, you're gonna have, okay, let's create another square. But on top of that, now also in the self-serve is not just being able to understand and discover the data quicker, but it's also being able to curate the data. Okay, so Dremio gives you sort of a mix where you can kind of mix, ETL and ETL and ELT in different ways that you want. Okay, so you might transform some of the data before it lands in one of these three sources, so that way it's kind of already in its optimal form. Or you might land raw data, let's say in your data lake, and instead of transforming it and making a copy that's sort of optimized, what you do is you use Dremio's no copy architecture to create views of that data that already kind of change the data types of different columns, rename columns, join it with other data sets, do all this stuff. And the cool thing is, the platform, the ability to do so is simple enough that you can have self-serve curation of that data. So first, let's just change the color of the box. Okay, so that we can keep differentiating. Okay, and we'll call this self-service data curation. Okay, so instead of basically anytime I need another, if I'm a data analyst or a data scientist, I don't have to wait for a data engineer to satisfy a ticket to join two data sets or create a slight variation of this data set with a slightly renamed column, because they don't have to necessarily make another copy. I can just take the data sets that I have access to and create those logical views on that data that curate the data that I need. Okay, so that's something I can do. Okay, now on top of that, what's going to happen is that you may want to accelerate, okay, your data. So basically, Dremio also provides a layer for acceleration. Okay, so Dremio's query engine is already like really fast. It's using things like Apache Arrow to do really high speed in-memory processing of your data. Okay, but it doesn't just rest on that. Okay, on top of just like a lot of internal optimizations to the engine itself, you're going to have the columnar cloud cache, which is going to be using a lot of different caching strategies to make sure that, one, it's going to reduce your costs because you're not having to make as many round trips to your object storage, so you're reducing those access costs. But also it's going to be able to speed up the computation of those queries, so you're going to get a better performance, which also means lower compute costs and again lower access costs because of that caching. Okay, so in that case, let's just change the color of that square. Okay, so we're going to have acceleration. And that's again going to come up in the form of like the C3 cache, which is going to accelerate queries. Apache Arrow, again, using that standard in-memory performance, is going to basically accelerate in a couple different levels. Like one, because you're using Apache Arrow is, again, allows for fast processing, but also there's things like Apache Arrow Flight that makes it where you don't have to serialize and deserialize the data when you're moving it between point A and point B. So then when you're pulling that data down from Dremio, that part also gets sped up because you're using the Apache Arrow pipeline to move that data from point A to point B. So you get not only sped up processing, but sped up data movement when you're trying to pull that data down from Dremio from your query. Okay, so you're getting all of this. We're not even done yet. And then there's also something called reflections, okay? And what reflections are, they're like, the simplest way I like to think about them is like materializations on steroids. So when you have like materialized views, you generally have like, you get the benefit of speed performance because you're creating a physical copy of a subset of a table, okay? And basically scanning that smaller subset's a lot faster, but you are making a copy. Okay, which is fine, but it's under a different namespace. So if I query table A, I'm still scanning all of table A. I have to remember to scan table A materialization 1. Okay, and if I don't scan that right name, I don't get the benefit. 2, you have to figure out how you're going to keep it in sync. Okay, how often do I refresh it? How do I refresh it? Okay, do I just redo the query, or do I do some sort of change data capture to capture the changes periodically? How am I going to sync that together? Because again, there's different trade-offs between reads and writes and figuring that all out. Okay, and 3, if I have sort of like 10 different query patterns, I might end up creating 10 different views and 10 different materializations to speed up those 10 views of my table, okay, instead of, less. Okay, so reflections kind of addresses these three issues. When I have a reflection, I have a materialization, but I get the benefit from my materialization if I query table A. There's no other namespace. Two, Dremio is going to handle a lot of the syncing logic. You can manually refresh a reflection, but you can also automate the updating of reflections, and it can be done in a variety of ways that are optimal. Okay, and three, a reflection on, let's say, table A will speed up not only queries on table A, but also queries on any logical views of table A. So basically, you don't necessarily have to then create materializations of all the logical views to get acceleration of those logical views. Okay, so you get a lot more bang for your buck. So you end up having to use less storage to get that acceleration. Okay, it's going to be a lot easier to use that acceleration. People don't have to know about all these different namespaces. Okay, and another really cool thing is that you can optimize these reflections for different query patterns. So you can actually create multiple reflections on the same table that have different partitioning rules, different sorting rules, so that way they accelerate different types of query patterns. And then Dremio will handle the matching of saying that this query is going to be best matched with this reflection. So you get this really, really awesome acceleration technology there. Okay. And then also there's aggregate reflections, which allow you to kind of aggregate statistics or accelerate aggregate statistics, which is going to allow you to have sort of really crisp BI dashboards. Okay, but with all of this put into place, then you have a nice, robust access layer. Because again, it's all about making things easier. So you have this great UI, okay, but there's going to be different ways to access this platform once it's created. Okay, so you're gonna be able to access through the web UI, okay, and the web UI is super intuitive, super easy to use. Has a lot of really cool features like text SQL. So you could literally just say, hey, I want to write a query between these two data sets. Write me, and then literally ask your question, and it'll generate the SQL for you using generative AI. So you have a lot of really quality of life features there in the web UI. Also tools for if you're not an SQL expert, as far as things like changing column types, renaming columns, creating views. All of this can be done in a no-code way. But if you know SQL, you can also have full control over sort of how you're constructing your queries. And because it's SQL driven, that SQL doesn't have to be done through the web UI. It can be sent via our REST API. So there's the Dremio REST API. There is you can access it through ODBC, JDBC, and you can access it, okay, via that Aeroflight connector that I mentioned last time. And again, when you use Aeroflight, you avoid the deserialization of the data that might occur when using more row-based access layers like ODBC, JDBC. Okay, so you have all these different ways you can access the data. Okay, and that's great because what might you be doing with the data? Okay, you might be building a BI dashboard. Okay, and again, that BI dashboard, let's actually first change the color of that square, keep everything nice and colorful. Okay, that BI dashboard, which you have integrations directly into the Dremio UI with Tableau, Power BI, and there's plenty of integrations with other BI tools. Again, using those aggregate reflections, you're going to get that sub-second BI. Okay, you might be creating data applications. So maybe you're creating, a web application for maybe other customers of yours to be able to access their data and how they with you. Okay, so imagine like you were a vendor and basically your clients want to kind of understand sort of like their picture of their services that they're procuring for you. So they want to have access to some of your data and you want to kind of give them a nice application to access it with. Okay, you can do that easily. Again, and that you can create a data application in any language you want, whether you're creating a Python application, a JavaScript application, a Ruby application, a Java application, because again, they're going to be able to access that data via whatever interface you prefer. Okay, you have those interfaces so you can create those applications. Whether you're doing ad hoc analytics in a notebook, okay, whether you are pulling in that data for pretty much any other purpose you can think of. Okay, basically you're going to have easy access to that data. And the cool thing is it doesn't matter where the data is, whether it's in a database, a data lake, or a data warehouse, through the Dremio platform, it creates a single access point, so that way anyone can easily access the data. They're going to be able to easily know what data they have access to because of the semantic layer. And then that semantic layer also allows you to govern that data down to row and column access rules, user-based access rules, group-based access rules, all sorts of really cool ways to kind of control access. But they're going to be able to easily discover the data they have, easily access the data, okay, and then they'll be able to curate even additional, more refined, do a lot of that last mile ETL work, okay, right straight from the Dremio UI, and create their own logical views for the data as they need it, instead, which allows you to free up your data engineers on making all the pipelines that fuel this layer of things that much more sort of robust and optimized. Okay, so bottom line is Dremio is going to be make using all your data wherever it lives easier. Okay, it's going to make using all of your data wherever it is faster, because again, because of all the different ways Dremio accelerates queries, and it's going to allow for open access to that data with all the different ways you can connect to the Dremio platform, which leverages open formats like Apache Iceberg, Apache Arrow, okay, very much leveraging open source technology at every end, so that way you're never locked in any way. So my name is Alex Merced, developer advocate here at Dremio. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Have a great day and enjoy.